Hello and welcome back to the Comic Literate podcast, the podcast that does deep dives into the best of comic books, graphic novels, mangas, and penny dreadfuls. I'm your host, the soon-to-be known as Comic Stan, and with me, as always, is my fastidious co-host, it's Jamie.
All right.
That doesn't sound very fastidious.
I can be fastidious. I mean, I am generally fastidious.
Well, that's why I picked it. And then I thought fastidious would be more like a, hello, how do you do? I don't know what fastidious means. It's like attention to detail.
This is I mean, the irony being
exactly the irony of not knowing what fastidious means
and secretly knowing and it actually just being a bit.
I mean, I'm always about the bits. You know this about me by now.
Commitment to the bit.
When we initially conceived of this podcast idea, I think we realized kind of later on the goals of the podcast, whereas yours was, let's be an informative podcast where we do critical analysis of these texts. And I'm
still a bit salty about it.
And I'm like, I just want to do jokes about Spider-Man.
But the problem is, whenever I put a dick joke in, you edit it out.
Not all of them. And
most of them.
Well, the thing is now, the list is never going to know how many, I could leave in all of them, but for all they know, for every one, there could be 99 others that I took out.
And they're all the best ones he takes out.
All right, 99 dick jokes, go.
Oh.
Exactly.
I'm not a performing chimp. I don't just make up dick jokes for your amusement.
Is it because now that the call has been made that you are not unable to rise to the occasion?
Oh, I don't think I could rise to any occasion today, mate, unfortunately.
Oh, you're fine. It's been hot over here, and that's why we British people, we tend to melt slightly, both physically and spiritually in the heat.
Absolutely.
And we're both feeling a bit. I didn't realize how tired I got in the heat until I took a nap yesterday.
Oh, dude, I have been taking a nap. I've been siestaing daily. It's been magnificent.
And proven recently, medically, good for you to take small power naps. 30 minutes is what they recommend.
Didn't do Margaret Thatcher any fucking good, though, did it?
Well, I mean, I don't think it makes you immortal.
Well, it doesn't make you nice either.
No, it never said make you nice. Healthy was the thing. Healthy doesn't always mean nice.
I started taking regular naps, and I actually put quelled a miners uprising.
I don't think it's not like the link between Adolf Hitler and veganism, vegetarianism, not vegan.
No, it's because you like dogs.
Yeah, exactly. But again, it's not that link of genocide and vegetarianism. There seems to be a correlation here, and that's where the old correlation without causation, I think, comes into play.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is a science thing for our 1% of listeners who care about science at all.
Well, clearly, if they liked that Flash comic, they do not care about science.
Science fiction. You'd be like, hey, but what if something else happened?
What would you do if you had a cosmic treadmill?
I think for people who don't have super speed, it would kill you.
Oh.
I suspect. I don't know that for sure, but I don't think anyone's been Batman's been like, hey, can I have a go? Although
I bet Bruce would have a go.
There is a panel somewhere, because I read it, where Flash goes back in time on the cosmic treadmill, and Batman needs to go with him, but he can't go on the treadmill for whatever reason, because it goes
through
he
just go
time
on his
space.
back?
No, that's when he needs to get a ride from Superman. No, he gets his Batarang on a rope thing, attach it to the Flash, so he just kind of rides behind, he's hitched a ride on a plane.
Superhero shenanigans.
I mean, there's a comic panel. I think it was a joke panel someone made, and it was the Justice League need to. No, it was Robot Chicken. Robot Chicken, great superhero content. There's mixes on YouTube of all their superhero jokes. And it was how are we going to get Batman over there? It's Superman's quick, get in my back. And Batman's I'm not doing that. It makes me feel like a child. And then the Green Lantern's well, I can make you something to ride in. And he makes a yacht, a small rowing boat. And Batman's just kind of on the rowing boat
this is better.
Yeah, and everyone's going, and then it plays music. It's sailing along on a little boat or something like that. But great content if you want superhero stuff. Robot Chicken it's a good place for that. And here, whenever we do superhero stuff.
No, it's not a good place for that.
I mean, we have our own name for it, Superhero Shenanigans.
Superhero Shenanigans.
That could be a motto going forward. I mean, it basically is now, isn't it?
Well, it's become my fucking motto, isn't it?
And to be fair, there's a lot of worse ways you could have. To be fair, I think I initially drawn to superhero bollocks. But then that's quite a British thing. I don't know if Shenanigans the American version of bollocks.
Shenanigans just has sibilants.
Sure.
You don't know what sibilants.
Of course I don't. I've never read a book.
Fuck's sake, you must know what sibilance is.
Right. Write in if you know don't look it up, but write in if you know before looking up what that word meant.
Yeah, if you know what sibilance is, leave a comment with a definition. The best definition, the least accurate definition will get a shout out on the next episode. And so I can't now tell you what sibilance is because the listeners will know. So we just have to leave it there.
We'll save it for next week, by which I mean we'll completely forget and never bring it up again.
Oh, I'll bring it up. I take sibilance very seriously.
Well, there's been a number of things that we've been like, we'll do it next week, and then we never have. So this will be the true test of whether sibilance is actually important or not.
I'm going to make a note.
You're going to tattoo it on your arm like a memento. Like, and then wake up in a hungover state like, sibilance, what does that mean?
I have a pretty lax attitude towards getting tattoos, but I am not that bad.
Even you won't get a tattoo as a memo.
Yeah, fucking A.
In case you forget, like, a shopping list on your forearm.
I'll be honest with you, I don't have enough room.
I mean, it's one word. You get that on your little finger if you really want it.
Depends on how big your little finger is, doesn't it?
And I guess how small the font is, I guess.
Yes.
We've kind of got into a narrative cul-de-sac of banter.
Yeah, we need to do a 3-pointer.
Well, the best way to do that is to probably get into the comic that we're looking at this week.
Yeah, it's a good one as well.
It's a fantastic one, I thought. It is, as you've seen by the title, a nice house on a lake or the lake. Let me just double check that. On the lake, the only one lake.
It is at that point.
I mean, well, we'll get into it. And it is written by a James Tynion IV, and I double-checked that pronunciation because I want to check exactly how that name was. And in the blurb I have here, just alongside his Detective Comics partner, Álvaro Martínez Bueno. So, Bueno, yes.
That's a fucking great name.
Good is good.
Good is good.
One of the best jokes, and this might come up later.
Are you going to steal someone's joke? I'm going to credit... kind of, because I remember it from my failed comedian days in London. But someone had a really good joke, and it was a guy who pulled out a bag of couscous. Said, "Couscous, so nice they named it twice." And then he pulls out a bonbon. And he says, "Bonbon, so good they named it good twice." And then it's a simple joke. It's a nice one, but it does the job. Did it get a laugh?
I mean, it wasn't mine, so it definitely got a laugh.
Oh, this is the first time we've told the listeners about your failed comedian days.
I mean, I mentioned being a failed comedian, and it's going to come up later because one of the characters is a comedian as well. So we will get into it. But off the cuff, what did you think of this Eisner Award winner of 2022 Best New Series comic?
I think it was deserving.
One of my first thoughts when reading it is I can immediately see why it's won an award. Or awards, plural.
This is the kind of shit that wins awards, isn't it?
Exactly. And a best place to start, I think, this is a very, very story-centric comic book, I would say. But that being said, the art, well, I think we've got a lot to say about the art as well.
The art is fucking stunning.
Exactly. And we are only covering the first 7 of 12 issues.
Yeah.
And I think the best advantage of that is that it's literally impossible for us to spoil the very end of the story. So I think we've got that to our advantage right now. But because it's so story focused, and I want to throw it to you and say, can you tell us, me and the listeners, so I'm a human on Earth and you're talking to me, right? Can you tell me what the first issue is about? What's the story of the first issue?
So, an enigmatic man from New York is reaching out to all of his closest friends through high school and college and asking them to come and spend a week in a beautiful lake house with him that he has been gifted. And so we're introduced to a cast of characters and we start to unpick his relationship with some of the more prominent among them, I think is the sort of rough outline of that first issue.
I would say that really gets into the character aspect of the story. I think there is it does get into a bit of what the bigger story is. Do we want to get into that now, or do we want to...
Oh, does it? Because I read the first issue. I read this in like 2 sittings. So I read the first issue a few weeks ago.
Right. So
does it get post-apocalyptic in the first issue?
I'm almost certain that it does a little bit. So it basically is revealed that all these people have gone to this lake house. They've kind of met each other, slowly, got to know who's who. And then the guy who knows them all is basically like, hey, by the way, the world has ended. Actually, no, he doesn't even... Someone connects to like Twitter and it has a really cool page of like all the posts.
Yes, I remember that. That's such a great panel.
And everything's on fire. Everywhere in the world is on fire except for the lake house and the surrounding kind of forest. And then the guy who knows them all is basically like, hey, yeah, the world's ended and I brought you here to kind of save you, and there's everything we need here to basically live. And then one of them's like, you're a fucking crazy person, like what's going on? And then someone tries to punch him, and then his head goes all weird, and he's basically strongly implied to be not human, but we don't know what he is. So that is basically the premise as well as we can give it, because I feel like every issue afterwards gives a bit of extra information.
Oh, that's the story unravels at a really good pace.
Yes, exactly.
I never felt myself overwhelmed by it. But there was constant character revelations, and we were always seeing more depth about the interpersonal relationships between the characters. Because something you said a minute ago, he said they all got to know each other, but they all knew each other. These people had known, most of these people, or at least subsets of them,
yes,
had known each other for years, like 20 odd years or something.
And that was actually why I found one of the most interesting parts is the spider web of planning that would have had to gone into writing the story.
Yeah.
So I mentioned this before when we did 8 Billion Genies, because that had such like a world building, complex spiderweb of narrative. This one is more about, again, the interpersonal relationship between characters. And one of the bits you mentioned, the subsets, I thought was so interesting was you had this group who knew each other from high school, and then the group from college, and then the one character who the first issue is about, essentially, who is like the only person who met this guy post-college. So you've got two subsets, and then one person who's just out of it completely as well. And it really, really plays into the way people know each other from old and new, and also the positives and negatives that come with that. So you have some people who are friends from high school, but because they knew each other in high school, they've actually drifted apart since then. So you've got some characters who don't know each other at all become close because they just get on in this initial meeting, essentially. And it's all with the backdrop of something fucking weird is going on. So I feel like, again, reading it, it was difficult for me at times to remember who was who. And that more speaks to not a negative, but just a telling of how complex the interrelationships are.
Yeah, it was certainly something that I found I would have to kind of go back and reassess and check. And yeah, absolutely. And to be honest with you, there's still some characters who I don't feel I have a great understanding of, but I think that might be because we're only up to issue 7 of 12. I think there's a lot that's going to happen in these last 5 issues.
Yes, and to be fair, I think what speaks to that especially is each issue does seem to be from a specific character's viewpoint.
Yeah,
and then the entire layout of each issue is, I think, really interestingly done, where it begins with this person surviving in the apocalypse.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And then they talk about how they first met and how they knew an enigmatic character, Walter, who, interesting I find, is he's one of the few characters with glasses. I don't know if he's the only one.
No, he's not. Norm has glasses as well.
But a great art choice, Norma.
Yes.
And that's a plot of the issue, which we'll get into.
We see her as Norm a lot.
Yes. And the Walter character, even though other characters have glasses, his glasses are always reflecting. So you never properly see... Well, not never. There are, I think, some times where you do see his eyes.
He whips them off in issue 7.
Yeah. But because his eyes are covered so much of the time, it's such a great little technique of making him feel different from the rest of the characters.
Oh, 100%. It puts I mean, if you think about eyes and our relationship with eyes...
Windows to the soul.
To the soul. But on a social level, that's where your focus will be when you're talking to somebody. If somebody doesn't look at your eyes, that can be really unsettling. And so we've got this character here that is kind of the central focus of the entire narrative, and we never really see his eyes. Even when he takes his glasses off, his eyes are closed. And so it dehumanizes him in a really powerful way. It makes him appear less human than the rest of the characters. And who did the art?
The art was the person who...
Bueno.
To the surname, Álvaro Martínez Bueno.
So Bueno's artwork is very expressive.
Mm.
He has a really nice sense of drafting human faces. Keep banging on about this recently, don't I?
But this is an especially good one for it.
Yeah, so it's not a literal style. There's definitely this kind of watercolor feel, I would say.
I literally put down watercolors as well. So
Yeah.
I think that must have been just an obvious thing about some of the panels.
It's not an illustrative style. It's very much a more painterly style.
Mm.
But within that, he has a very grounded sense of human expression. And so a lot of the characters have these really expressive faces, and we see them through their lives a lot. So we see them when they're younger and when they're older. And he's aged them, but the way they hold their faces is still very similar. He's got great consistency in that regard. And then we get Walter, who is just completely nonplussed.
Mm.
He's such a straight-faced character, isn't he? And even before, in issue 1, before I had the character revelation that he wasn't human, I kept looking at him and being like, there's something uncanny valley about that character. There's something uncanny valley about that face. You know when we are presented the bar scene where the sort of
first character, whose name I only remember because it's Ryan.
Ryan, yeah. So
a girl with the name Ryan, which I was like, whoa, you don't see that often.
No, you really don't. So when he's in the bar chatting with Ryan, and he keeps pulling Ryan out to bars to talk about the conversation she refers to it as, doesn't she?
Yes.
There's a couple of panels where we're looking over her shoulder at him, or they're sat side by side at a bar, and there is something not human about that face. They did an incredible job of presenting this uncanny valley character, and to do that in a still, I think is a real achievement. It aids the story. It gives you, it kind of hints at this character revelation before we actually get it expositionally, which is really special.
Yeah.
You know, when we talk about exposition a lot, and we talk about artwork serving the story, and I think this is a really great example of when it's being done really fucking well. And we're seeing this, all of these very characterful, expressive illustrations set against Walter, who is just completely straight-faced, completely not looking very human. I thought it was really interesting.
I found the panels and the color, so the watercolor texture kind of, it makes it feel like the color's bleeding out from parts to other parts, like foreground to background and things like that. And I think what you find is the color sets the tone very well by having this style. So you'll have like a kind of like the nightclub bar kind of thing. It's kind of like I remember it being like it's a purplish, bright but not too bright. So it's that kind of feel, and it gives you the feel of like nightlife. And then obviously it cuts back and forth to Ryan in the Monopocalypse, and it's all bright red, fiery kind of feeling. So the color really sets the tone for a lot of scenes, but only, I think, in scenes that are either flashback or flash forward, or present scenes where things start to go a bit fucked.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whereas when there's kind of just expositional scenes, I mean, normally we use that in the negative term, like way too expositional, but the scenes that requires just, people are meeting people and it's all just kind of normal stuff happening. When it's those, it's very realistic.
Yeah.
It's very could be like a picture almost. And then as soon as it gets into anything kind of a bit different or a bit weird, the color sets the tone in really interesting ways.
We have a word when we're analyzing literature, or not a word, an expression called semantic field. Have you ever heard of it?
No, I haven't.
So semantic field is a tool you can use when you're writing, and it's something you can read for, where you can use certain types of language to set a certain scene. And it's a really subtle technique that writers will use. So say you are trying to write quite a forthright character, you will use a semantic field with quite a lot of bold, punchy words. You're trying to make somebody seem a little bit more quiet and intellectual, you'll maybe use some more heterodox language. And when I was reading this, that really came to mind, because the use of color, and as you really articulately put,
astutely noted, the changing use of color and the way that those differing color palettes indicate to the reader that they're in a different part of the story. I thought that was a really incredible narrative tool.
again, it's artwork actually being used to serve the story. There's this thing that musicians talk about a lot, where you're playing on a song, you have to serve the song, right? Like, if you're making this really beautiful, delicate acoustic piece, you may be able to absolutely fret wank and shred on guitar, but that does not serve the song. And so you don't do it because you want to serve the song. And again, the artwork here isn't there for the sake of having pictures so that it can be sold as a comic book. This is a piece of art that is serving a story. And it's just such a breath of fresh air considering what we've been talking about recently.
To be fair, we've had some recently that give or take in kind of art, like it's been up and down. And even something like 8 Billion Genies, which I'm referring to because it was kind of, I think, the last
art was
great
very
one we
good,
did, but very different goals, I think, in those kind of arts.
I mean, as much as I loved the art of 8 Billion Genies, it was a little bit more traditionally comic booky.
It was definitely more context based.
Yeah,
it was like, look at all these cool things, rather than making something that might be more benign. Like in this, it makes benign scenes more interesting with the color and everything else.
To use the parlance of youth, the art in this comic is a whole ass vibe.
I was going to say the art was goated. that was going to be my parlance of youth.
Oh, mate, look at us trying to get down with the kids. I wonder what our age demographic is.
I think I've got some figures on YouTube that I could delve into, but let's just say for now, our audience are probably at an age that you would call goated with the sauce.
As long as they don't get lost in the sauce, it's okay.
Exactly. I thought this would be an interesting point to make. The whole aspect of Walter being mentioned so heavily in the beginning of the scenes. So not only the character who each issue is about a certain character, and it opens with them in the apocalypse. They talk about how they met Walter and their relationship with him, as well as some actual flashback of like pivotal scenes with this character. And then it jumps to the present, where it's in the main story as it's unfolding still. And the way that everyone talks about Walter without him being there most of the time, I thought that akin to a certain novel by the name of Rebecca.
Certain novel by the name of Rebecca.
Do you know the novel? This is going to be my gold star moment, because I know about a novel and that I can reference in talking about this comic book title. So.
Well done. Well, we'll see if you get a gold star. But if you get a gold star, you have to edit the fucking thing in.
Yeah, I'll put the noise in. The Mario noise, yeah. And here it was. So the novel Rebecca...
Well, I haven't decided whether you get it or not.
Okay, so the novel Rebecca the story is about... It's like kind of period piece a bit, and it's... a wealthy man has just married his new bride, and they go back to their estate mansion to start their new life as newlyweds. But then at some point, the new bride finds out that he had a previous bride before her called Rebecca. And the story is about everyone constantly talking about this previous bride.
Who's the novel by?
I just Googled it. So the novel Rebecca is a 1938 Gothic novel written by English author Daphne du Maurier.
Daphne du Maurier. You get a gold star.
Fantastic.
Well done.
My first this year, and probably one of few. And you know what? The only reason that I knew about this at all is because of a Mitchell and Webb sketch.
For fuck's sake.
And Google if you want, but the point of the sketch is a movie producer being like, if we're going to make a film about called Rebecca, you're damn sure the main character is going to be Rebecca, because otherwise audience is going to be confused. So then the story becomes, what if the film Rebecca, based on the novel Rebecca, but the main character is Rebecca, and the guy keeps talking about his next wife, his next bride. He's like,
brilliant.
Yeah, he's like, I'm going to talk about you endlessly to my next bride, whoever she will be.
Mitchell and Webb, man, their sketches are beautiful.
They're up there. They're fantastic. So the structure of the issues, as I say, I found that so interesting because like you mentioned earlier, it was kind of hard to know which character was which. And I found once you had the character's issue, you then knew the character.
And you started to see how they slotted in, didn't you?
Exactly. And what's interesting about in that first issue, you get these brief little interactions that then reveal themselves later. So it's all foreshadowing, but foreshadowing for existing things, but that will be revealed later. The prime example, I think one of the best ones is the character Norma is hanging out by herself, and at one point some other characters turn up, and they kind of reveal themselves to be in the house.
Yeah.
And one was like, hey, Norma. And Norma's like, oh, hey. I can't remember which character it was, the other one. But then Norma's immediately like, hey, Ryan, I'm going to follow you now. Like, I was going to stay here, but now I'm going to come with you.
It was Reg, wasn't it? It was when Reggie turned up.
Not Reg. Reg turns up way later. It was either Ronnie or the other one that Ronnie hangs out with, whose name escapes me at this moment. But basically, you find out later it's because they are exes.
Yeah.
So it's just that little bit tidbit, and then I think there's a lot of those kind of interactions, which I think once you finish the 12 issues, if you then reread it, you'll be like, that's why they're like that, and that's why they're not friends. And
this is definitely something that I think will require a second pass. Like, I definitely want this to be a two-parter. I definitely want to talk about all 12 issues. I definitely want to reread the first 7 before I do that.
Yeah, we'll do a retrospect of the ones we've already read, accompanied by the ending as well.
Yeah, because there's a lot of depth here, isn't there? Like, Norma's character is fascinating. And in issue 7, where we find out that she's been sequestered, that's powerful stuff.
Yes. I think that's issue 8, actually. I think that's the last one I read.
Oh, well, I must have read 8 issues then.
So we're doing the first 8 issues now. Not that it matters much, but yeah, there's the plot, I think, reading something like this, I've read a few bits and pieces, whether it be comics or television shows or even films, where they set up a really outlandish, mysterious plot with the hook of find out what's happened. And I think a lot of these type of stories, if you have the reference, they suffer from, there's probably a name for it, but I refer to it as like Lost comparison, I suppose. The TV show Lost. So that...
Right, there we go. I thought you meant you'd lost the comparison. I was like, this isn't going very well, buddy.
This is like a...
Duck out, abort.
This is like a who's on first kind of situation. But so, yeah, the TV show Lost was obviously big at the time because it set up this crazy, like, hey, these people have crash landed on this island, but something else is going on. And people were gripped to find out what happened. And then by the end, it was like, maybe they were in purgatory or something, or, you know,
Lost
maybe they
really
died.
Fizzled out, didn't it?
Exactly. And that's, I think, I think it's something to be considered whenever you're starting something like this, is it actually going to pay off? And to be fair, 8 issues in, I feel like it will be. As it helps knowing that it's a 12-issue limited run.
It's certainly paying off for me. I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, it doesn't feel aimless like a Lost might. Like, one of the Lost series ended with, like, they opened a hatch.
Yeah, the fucking hatch.
And then it was just like, what's in the hatch? Find out in season 2. And it was like, oh, fuck you.
Because the hatch had been, like, a real focus for the whole season, hadn't it?
I actually hadn't watched Lost. I think by the time I considered getting into it, I heard all the negativity. And then I was like, oh, actually, I won't bother now.
I've not watched it for a long time.
But a lot of people spoke about, as I said, the anti-climax of all the questions not being answered, or at least enough to be satisfying. And I think that's had a resonance in, in modern fiction, I'd say, especially in television shows. But I think you can apply it to comics as well.
Oh, I think so. Yeah, I agree.
But the little bits of information we do get along the way, you mentioned earlier, paced fantastically. I would agree with that. I think you get a little bit each time. And it is a huge credit to the writing that it still manages to get these across while being from a different character's perspective per issue.
Yeah. And I think they did a really good job of leaving Reg till quite late, because Reg is so central to the story. There's a point where we find out that Reg has actually been helping Walter unknowingly for years to put this together. And so we find out about Reg in like issue 6. So we're already halfway through. We've met quite a few characters.
And he's been mentioned very sparsely in passing.
Yeah.
Which again, like I said earlier, little bits, little crumbs that pay off later.
And it turns out he's actually probably Walter's closest friend.
Well, as far as we know, because at this point, it's when it starts to introduce this element of memory wipe.
And then you get to issue 7 and Walter's just hanging out in the house with everyone. And so you get a sense that he's clocked that it's not gone well when he's told them all. So he's wiped their memories again and started again.
Yeah, and another comparison for this, for anyone who's seen it, I think this is very close comparison, is The Good Place.
Oh, The Good Place, yeah.
So if you've seen The Good Place, I mean, skip 5 minutes, skip a minute ahead or whatever if you haven't seen it.
Don't
and it's
skip
a good
any
show.
of it. Just listen to our hot take on The Good Place.
Just spoil yourself. But And to be fair, we're not getting it properly, but there is an element of resetting and memory wiping and stuff like that, which it was very comedic.
Yeah.
In this, because it's a more kind of serious tone, the memory wiping I actually felt was more sinister.
Oh, very sinister. Even the way he does it, forget.
Yeah.
It's sinister.
And the fact that these characters are kind of being forced to unknowingly repeat things and start anew and lose all the information that they've gained in their investigations of the house and the area, you feel like really sorry for them.
I think what was most insidious for me is that it became apparent he'd been doing it to all of them for his entire friendship with them. And so I really get a sense of Walter as being a being who does feel some human emotions. I mean, he made it quite clear that he was given a human body and he was given hormones. So he has some emotions. And so he would come clean to them and it would go really badly. And so he'd make them forget. And it kind of feels as though he kind of knew how they would all react once they were in the nice house.
Yes, and that's purely because of getting into the plan ahead of time and then freaking out and then being like, oh no, forget. And then just being like, knowing how they'll happen because he's had that basically same premise and conversation with them previously. And I think as well, there's a bit of an allegory here that may or may not be intentional, but having that controlling friend in a friend group.
Look at you looking at things allegorically.
I mean, I've just used the word allegorically for the first time ever because it basically there's a door in my brain that was dusted and not used, and someone's just kind of opened it. It's like, hey, there's these words in here that we could start incorporating.
I love having that effect on people. I'm just going to assume it's me.
It only took 10 plus years. We got there eventually.
No, it was more than 10 years, buddy.
Oh well,
we've known each other nearly 20.
Oh, we're feeling old.
Fucking aren't you?
The audience don't know that we're 70-year-old men who just sound young.
I don't think I sound young.
I mean, you did just use, what was it earlier? What was your youth parlance? How closely we cling on to this youth parlance. It just comes in flashes every now and then.
Yeah, absolutely.
But as I said, it felt to me like he was a kind of metaphor for, again, that controlling friend who kind of makes everyone else do what they want to do.
And doesn't that come across when there's one of the relationships that he held together? And kind of coerce the whole friendship group to hold this relationship together because it would be important to his plan later. That's some fucked up gaslighting. And
it wasn't even just to do with the sci-fi element. It wasn't like, oh, I need humans for this plan or whatever we're doing. But it did feel like even past the sci-fi element and all the plans and the plot and everything, that his character was imposing their own will.
Yeah.
Their own wants and needs into the story.
There is something that made me chuckle about it, which is that it becomes apparent that he needed human beings with the most best minds. And I find it really funny that those two people were his two best friends from high school, because that's not how the world works.
Yeah.
You don't just go to a random secondary and be like, I'm going to find couple geniuses here.
Well, I think that actually will become a reveal later. So this is pure speculation. I think he has said some bollocks about, oh, you guys were the best of humanity or whatever. I think the real test is going to be revealed that it's not necessarily they were the best of. I think it's about finding people who can work together and support each other or sabotage each other, whatever. But I think it's more about the relationship between the characters rather than the characters themselves. But I think that was some bollocks of hey, you guys are the smartest. It's like, one of them's a comedian, so I don't need to tell you, they're not good people. I speak from personal experience.
What, of being a bad person or being a comedian?
A little from column A and a little from column B.
I mean, I would like to draw your attention. There's a scene where they work out the food's running out and a notebook turns up, and whatever they write in the notebook is what they get. And the first few days it's all grocery shopping, and then day 9 is we want some chicken breasts and some mixed greens, and then day 11 is a lot of weed gummies.
That was good, and there was so much little bits of humor that did not feel out of place or jarring.
Do you know what? If I was trapped in that situation, at some point, one of my friends would go, we see if they'll get us some drugs.
and then that same a narrative device used for then a very harrowing thing later, where it shows one of the I think it's Ronnie. Her list is desperately begging for her husband and family, and then it just turns into ways to kill herself. And I think that was such like it was building up to it, like you could tell what it was going to be, and then when you see the list, it still hits as hard, which I think, again, credit to great writing.
Ronnie was definitely the malcontent, wasn't she, bless her?
Yeah, and that I think is actually my favorite issue so far, is I can't remember his name, but the comedian's issue.
Yeah.
I really liked that character after his issue. Beforehand, I felt he was just like again, having met them in my life and knowing them, the guy who just needed to make a joke of every situation.
So did you feel that he was quite accurately drawn based on your experience of spending a lot of time around London comedians?
I mean, he was a white, straight, cis guy, so yes, essentially.
Says it all, doesn't it?
But the way he came off, I think, before his issue was very accurate to that kind of stereotype. And then when you had actually his kind of more introspective parts in his own issue, that explained a lot about the character and made me like him a lot more.
Yeah, I hear that.
And there's one point which was a little bit obvious, but I mean, in this great a comic, I'll let it pass because, you know, it's not negatively affecting it. But there's a point where Walter kind of plainly says something that should have been maybe a bit more subtextual, where he says, "Oh, you notice things about people, like you see people and situations, and you kind of more paying attention than other people."
Oh, I read that as like a part of his tacit manipulation.
Well, it turned out to be true, though. So, maybe we don't know the intention. Maybe we never will. But there is like a stereotype about comedians, and if you've ever heard anyone talking about like the Joe Rogan podcast or anything like that, it's like comedians are the modern day truth tellers, and you know they speak truth to power and whatever. It's like, yeah, but they just talked about their dicks for like 20 minutes. So you're like, yeah, but you know, society and everything.
Society is built on dicks.
Exactly. But so there's that kind of element, like comedians think of themselves as like the very astute, like I read the situation and the people, and I can make the observations and stuff. But for him, it turns out to be very true, because he's the one who then points out things like, hey, does anyone actually remember how they got here? And no one does. But the slow building of that way, he's speaking to everyone, he becomes the mailman. So all the stuff that gets delivered to the house, which they can never actually see it get delivered, it just magically turns up. He literally requests a mailman outfit and then drops the stuff off to everyone. But in him talking to everyone, he does a little, hey, by the way, how did you get here? Like, did you fly or did you drive? And everyone's like, oh, I assume we probably flew because reasons. And then at the end of the issue, he's like, does anyone remember how he got here? And everyone's like, no. He's like, and you see that he suspected something, quietly gathered information, and then made his reveal at the end. So
like the true fourth estate.
Yep. Like a Sherlock Holmes detective guy.
I've made a deduction here.
Like a real Nancy Drew, I assume. I haven't read any.
Nancy Drew?
Yeah, I think she's like the American version of like young adult detective novels, I think.
Oh, right. Yeah, no, not my world.
No, I mean, I only know the name from pop culture, but... And then the end of that issue, when he also deduces that they are all immortal as well.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
And the way he shows it is just by cutting his throat open in front of everyone and going, no, it's he. And it's actually done really well. The issue ends on him having done it.
Yeah.
And saying like, no, we're all immortal. And then the beginning of the next issue is the chat transcript. It might not be issue classic, but the next part is the chat transcript, and it's people like freaking out about him having just cut his own throat, but the fact that it seems to be healing and everything as well. And also a great foreshadowing there when Norma tries to punch or hit Walter.
Yeah.
And her wrist explodes or something.
Yeah.
And then after a while, she's fine. And I remember reading that or seeing that in the issues going, what's happening there then? Because is there a wrist fucked or what's happening? And I did think for a second, I thought, is that just like, have they missed a bit?
Yeah.
And then it's revealed, no, that was like the sign that something else was happening with regards to, you know, their physical forms and everything. The one bit that really jarred me a little bit was the COVID testing in issue 1.
Oh my god, yeah, fucking hell.
And I see that in a lot of like films and TV and stuff, and every time I go, let's not go back, let's not remind ourselves of that again.
I've not really seen COVID pop up in much content that I consume, you know?
So there was TV shows that acknowledged it. Always Sunny did like a first
course
episode of a
they
new
did.
series. Brooklyn Nine-Nine, their last season was like made during or just after COVID, and they kind of acknowledged it there as well. But that was smart because they kind of connected it with like the absolute strain of the public services, including the police. But at the same time, they were also having to address all the police brutality shit that happened in the past few years as well.
Yeah.
So they had a lot to deal with when they came back.
Brooklyn Nine-Nine is quite knowing for a laugh track sitcom, isn't it?
Well, it's not a laugh track. So.
Oh, is it not?
No.
Oh, I've photoshopped a laugh track over that one.
Luckily, laugh tracks have been slowly phased out over time. The last laugh track show that I think I actually enjoyed was How I Met Your Mother.
Yeah, but that's beautiful and perfect in every way. We've already established this.
And honestly, you could take the laugh track out of it and it'd still be as good, I think.
It's funny.
If you take the laugh track out of Friends, they just all seem like sociopaths.
Oh, it's galling, isn't it?
It just looks really awkward.
Or
like,
Seinfeld.
Yeah, I haven't seen enough Seinfeld to know the difference, so...
I mean, it's Seinfeld.
Probably the same. But yeah, there was a little bit where they were testing temperatures, and I was a bit like, oh, like, can we not, like, acknowledge that? And it also seemed a bit needless because it never comes up really again.
Yeah.
But maybe there's some thematical connections with being locked inside a house.
Well, fuck. Hadn't considered it
I
I'm
mean, coming in with the insights this week.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a long ass day.
Whatever gives me the edge, like,
Yeah,
I'll take it.
I'm not. I need you to fill the gaps here, buddy.
I'm like actually turning on my critical analysis part of my brain for the first time. And it's a switch.
How does it feel?
Well, it was a switch in my brain that was just covered in cobwebs and dust. And someone was like, "We got this thing over here," and they were like, well, "Fuck, how long has that been there for?" Guess we'll try it.
For reference for the listener, I was up at 5 and then went on a road trip for work and then drove back, and I am dead. So you're getting low energy, Jamie, today. I'm struggling to articulate myself. It's not going well.
Well, look, I'm here to pick up the slack.
This is what you're here for.
But then all good relationships, I think I heard this from Chris Rock. He said all good relationships are, people think about it as 50-50, and it's really 60-40. But it's whoever's got the 60 who can have it at the time.
Yeah, it's equity as opposed to equality.
Exactly. Who is there? Sometimes, he described in one of his last specials this, sometimes you're lead singer, sometimes you're playing tambourine.
And sometimes Will Smith slaps you in the face.
Yeah. Because of their fucked up relationship.
Yeah, let's not even go there.
I just love, he cuts from laughing to, oh no, I'm actually really offended on her behalf now.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like Ricky Gervais's joke about it.
Not sure if I heard it.
Somebody asked him what he would have said, what he would have done if Will Smith had reacted that way if he'd made that joke. And he said, well, if I'd have been there, I wouldn't have made the joke. I wouldn't have made a joke about her hair. I would have made a joke about her boyfriend. And I just thought that would, that would have been funny. And I imagine Will Smith probably would have laughed at that joke.
And then done the exact same thing afterwards.
And then knocked him out.
Or at least just slapped him. I do like the phrase, get my blank's name out of your mouth. Out of your damn mouth. That's become like a meme now. And just seeing the creation of a meme is so good.
Yeah, watching it happen.
Also, just the most tangent of tangents, I frequent a subreddit about pro wrestling. And
of course you do.
The morning after the Oscars, I was a bit confused because the top thing in it was like post-match results. And I was like, well, there wasn't any significant wrestling on last night. I looked, it was literally Will Smith versus Chris Rock. And I was like, what the fuck is this? What's going on? And then I read it, I was like, good joke.
Who is it? It was Zuck. It was the Zuck.
And Musk.
Yeah, we're meant to have an MMA fight. But do you know Mark Zuckerberg's now like getting really into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? Yeah,
but he's not in good health or anything. Like,
is he not?
Zuck, like, there's a lot of...
If I had his money, I would be fucking stacked.
Yeah, but the thing is, he's actually been doing some kind of martial arts for years now, but he's also in really good shape. Whereas Musk is like, might be wearing a girdle. And I don't like...
might be wearing a girdle? That's the best thing you've ever said. Like, can you imagine Elon Musk getting out of his Tesla with a fucking girdle on?
I mean, he might, for all we know.
It might be his thing. He's a fucking weird dude,
but
isn't he?
Zuck is stacked now and is actually doing martial arts. And again, no good billionaires. Like, just off the top, we are of that shared belief.
Yeah.
But in terms of billionaire versus billionaire, my money's on Zuck.
Oh, fucking A, yeah.
Especially the meme I saw, which articulated very well, was the look on Musk's face when the cage door closes and Zuck takes off his skin to reveal his reptilian form. Because of the two of them, one of them, who most likely to be a reptile.
Yeah, I've always found Mark Zuckerberg a little uncanny valley, I'll be honest with you.
Well, there's a picture of, he's doing like a presentation for Meta or Facebook at one point, and there's just those just like bland backgrounds that don't mean anything. It's like a shelf with like some vague bland books or whatever. There's a bottle of barbecue sauce on one of the things, and someone captured it, and they went like, what the fuck is this? And then the like top caption was like, what do humans like on their bookshelves? Oh, yes, barbecue sauce.
I mean, it's saying a lot about somebody when Jesse Eisenberg is a little bit too charismatic to play them properly.
I mean, nail on the head there in one, yeah.
Like, I was quite proud of that.
Yeah, that was good. Astute observation.
Hey, that's all I'm here for today, lads, is astute observations.
Your observations have gone from the normal highbrow level to like Zuckerberg's a bit of a weirdo. That's your lower running.
This episode has lost all form.
Well, let's inject some form back into it by me talking about why I know it. Another nice bit of foreshadowing was in the invite to the people. So generally, a great thing about these issues and this comic is the occasional still frame of, I say still, they're all still frames. The occasional, none of them were moving. That'd be a great comic book. Imagine if the panels were moving.
That would be a TV show.
That's why I love TV shows so much.
All the way back round.
Exactly. There's occasionally a panel or a page will be some kind of written text.
Yeah, so like an IM exchange or an email or whatever.
Exactly. And those are used really well to kind of flesh out the story in ways that didn't even need to, but it just feels like it adds to the pace when you're going from like what's happening to reading a page of text to back to conversation.
Unfortunately, that stuff always just reminds me of like Dracula.
Are there pages of text in Dracula?
Well, yeah, obviously.
Well, yeah, beyond the written page.
Do you want to know the word for that? When a novel is just letters.
You ain't getting a gold star for this because this is your wheelhouse, but go on.
An epistolary.
Wow.
So an epistolary novel is where it's letters back and forth, and there is a lot of epistolary in this.
You know what's interesting? My favorite epistolary that I've read recently is Jonathan Hickman's run on X-Men, because he's been doing that since he took over in 2019, I want to say, maybe. But he's been inject that into all the X-Men titles. So every X-Men title under his kind of head of X banner has that as well. Yeah. But there'll be like confidential documents. So there'll be like blackouts and stuff.
Yeah,
and
that's exactly how an epistolary works.
So what you're saying is the latest X-Men run that I keep banging on about is actually in a literary way, very highbrow.
Well, it just stems from a certain literary tradition.
Sure, I'll take that.
Because letter writing was such a popular thing in the Victorian era, and the novel is a Victorian invention, it was only natural that somebody would try and bring that in as a structure for a novel. And Bram Stoker did a really good job of it. But yeah, no, absolutely. Like I like epistolary because it's a more charming way of bringing a retrospective in, or for exposition. It can be really useful for that. So it's a tool that they're using, isn't it? And
this is definitely the modern version of that tool, like cranked to 11, because it's instant messages and it's like WhatsApp and it's Twitter and just like the most lo-fi tech ones were probably like the transcripts of conversation. Yeah. But in terms of foreshadowing, there was one that really jumped out at me. I thought was so good. Was one of these pages of text. You just see the page. Maybe you see that it's on a desk or on a there's a little bit of background that you can tell is being read off something, and then all of a sudden one of them has a human finger in the way. And immediately you go, that's not happened before in only like the 4 or 5 issues preceding. So you immediately go, what the fuck's going on now? Like, that's something. And it's literally just the smallest little addition to a established trope within the comic that you go, oh my God, something's happening. I think some of my favorites were the instant message exchanges from when they were younger.
because he really conveyed a sense, and this is something that you must, we're of a certain generation.
MSN Messenger, yeah.
But that kind of late night, awkwardly talking to somebody that you're a teenager, you're a bag of hormones, you're up a little bit late, you're talking to somebody that you're kind of interested in. And it's that awkward, stilted, well, what do you think I mean? Conversation. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it represented that, and it dragged me back kicking and screaming to being like 14 years old on MSN.
This is one of those comics that, unfortunately, we are the age of the people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when it flashes back, it's like, oh, I'm an adult age now. Like you get reminders that when you are an adult, you get occasional reminders that you are the age of an adult.
Yes.
And you go, oh, my day's ruined.
And I think it's so interesting because when I was watching TV in like the noughties, and there would be flashbacks to the 80s and it would all be neon colours and big hair, I would kind of go, oh, that's a bit hokey. But now when stuff flashes back to the noughties and it's like instant messenger exchanges, or you see a text message that looks as though it was written on an old Nokia or something, it does hit you right in the nostalgia. It's so effective. The idea of taking media that's intended for adults and kind of making them reflect on their younger selves, I can see why it's a trope that keeps coming back in fiction.
I've noticed interestingly, and also whenever anyone mentions the 80s, my mind immediately still goes, 20 years ago. Always jumps to that.
Yeah, the 60s is only 30 years ago to me.
Yeah. But the flashbacks in that, like the 80s and 90s, and like if you go even further, 70s and 60s, they're so defined by their cultural looks. Of like the fashion at the time and the music and everything. And with the noughties, even I do get the nostalgia from like things like this, but if you just take a picture of the noughties, I don't feel that same sense of like immediate recognition.
It's the tech, isn't it?
The tech is the defining thing of the era now, whereas before, again, it was everything else. It was the fashion, the music.
It's the culture.
Yes.
God, it's the death of technology is the death of culture.
I mean, you heard it here first.
Fuck me, I'm gonna cry.
Breaking news for anyone who didn't already realize that, including us, to be fair.
Yeah.
But the invite was a good one of like showing some information. The invite that had gone out to everyone had that little bit of foreshadowing in it as well. And especially the bit I took note of was I think he was acknowledging that not everyone's going to be able to make it because he's trying to get everyone desperately into this one place for an extended period of time. And when you are adults in your 20s to 30s, that's just not going to happen.
I mean, when he's in college, when he's in high school, he says it's going to take about 2 decades. So I reckon they're all in their 30s.
Yeah, exactly. And then the bit of the invite that acknowledges that some people aren't going to be able to make it, it literally says, disappointing, but I think the others will be more disappointed in the long run. In terms of the people who, some people can't get there, but they're going to be the ones. It's disappointing for us now, but it's going to be more disappointing for them later on. And it feels
when they burn.
Well, that's the subtext, obviously, isn't it? But I think everyone's been in that situation where someone's been like, you have to come out to this event tonight. It's going to be amazing. You're going to regret it if you don't. And then if you don't go and you hear later, it's like, yeah, we all just got drunk. And then you're just like, well, I would have liked to have been there, but I think I can survive without it.
Yeah, I can survive without one more night of getting drunk.
But especially when you're younger, it's that mentality of like, yes, it's the last night on Earth. And then it's like, oh, it was actually the last night on Earth in this instance.
To use the parlance of my millennial brethren, FOMO.
Real FOMO, yes.
Yeah, we get that FOMO, don't we?
And then eventually you realise it's not that much to miss out on, actually. That's when you start becoming healthier and not staying out till 3 a.m. every night.
Yeah, I'm waiting for that one.
It'll be good when it hits.
Absolutely, when it kicks in.
And going back to the art again, the specific use of art for when things get crazy. Like I said about the colour setting the tone, but also in the specific penciling.
Yeah.
If penciling is even, like, I don't even know if penciling is used in this type of art.
This was drawn digitally.
Well, whatever the method was, when it gets into things going weird, and specifically, the example that keeps turning up is Walter's head after he gets hit.
Yeah.
It's just in a weird kind of like mid-water being hit with a bat kind of aesthetic. Yeah. But every time that comes in, the color changes to match it, as we said before, but just the specific detail of him just looking really fucked up.
It's great, isn't it?
It's like a rippling effect as well.
Yeah.
And I think they can't quite get across with the art style how it looks in a detailed way. Like, we can't really see what the characters have seen, but at least kind of gets across the sense of fear from this alien thing happening.
There is a distinct lack of detail at points, and I think that was purposeful. Before I played Tears of the Kingdom, one of my favorite games of all time was Silent Hill 2.
Right.
And the thing that, and again, I'm if you want a good review of Silent Hill 2, you should probably watch Ben Yahtzee Crowshaw's.
But any game, really.
Yeah, realistically. But one of the things that made that game so great as a horror game is that the thing you were scared of was an insidious force, and you never really saw it, and it was always in the shadows, and you were always catching a glimpse of it from the side. And it made it fucking terrifying. And so it really serves to make Walter truly mortifying in those moments where you see his true self and you see his actual form. You don't really see it. You get a glimpse at it, and what you're really going on is the reaction of the human characters in situ, and that's so much more powerful than just there's a monster.
Yes, exactly.
I think it's what made Stranger Things so effective. Is that it was quite late on that we actually saw what a Demogorgon looked like.
And speaking of Stranger Things, one thing I forgot to mention earlier was, do you know what else the James Tynion IV has written?
No.
He wrote Something's Killing the Children.
What, this same guy?
Same guy, yeah.
Whoa, well, doesn't that make a lot of sense? Wow, I really like his work in that case.
And to be fair, it shows quite a bit of range, I thought, because Something's Killing the Children is more of a quite linear storytelling, albeit with still some flashbacks. But
and it's a bit more grounded in comic book tropes.
Exactly.
There's nothing tropic. Well, there are tropes at play here. Obviously, it's a story. That's how tropes work. They're ever present. But what I'm not seeing here is that specific set of comic book tropes. I think that's probably what made it so compelling to me, is that it felt fresh. Yeah,
exactly. But again, Something's Killing the Children, I think it was more tropey, just in a kind of, again, a linear narrative sense.
Yeah.
Whereas this is very much there's storytelling devices just in how the issues are laid out, as we said before, and everything else.
Talking about how the issues are laid out, there is one thing that I didn't like about this comic.
Sure.
Panel layout, man. There are times where you've got a straight vertical thirds thing happening, but then the middle third is split up, and I was trying to follow the thread across these panels, and I couldn't work out what order they were going in, and it was like really pivotal conversations that I couldn't follow naturally, and I had to sit and pick them apart. And I don't know if that was an intentional thing where the writer and the artist together wanted the reader to have to focus in on those moments, and so they made that conversation feel a bit delineated, so you had to piece it together, and so it left you in the dark, or if it is just that it didn't scan very well. But there were points where I really felt like it wasn't scanning that well.
I noticed that as well, and I felt like at the time it was getting across a sense of chaos, because it was typically in like a big multi-person conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I felt like, and I had the exact same thing, I'd be like, hang on, do I read here, or I'll have to go here and read here? But it was always in a sense of like there was like an argument or like a kind of spirit debate about the situation or something like that.
So do you think it was being used to convey things happening at the same time? Because usually you'd just do that in one panel.
Yeah, I think because it had so many different people talking, I think, and this may not be for all of them, like some might just be not as good layout, but there was some certainly where it felt like you were trying to piece where the lines of text were coming from, because it felt like being in a big conversation, like a large group having conversation, you're trying to listen to everyone at the same time.
But there was also a moment where Walter had Norma, at that time still going by Norm, and Reggie at a sleepover at Norma's house. And there were 3 separate panels of his face in quarters that came together to make a whole panel of his face, but just not quite lined up.
Right.
And looking at that, I went, that was an artistic choice.
Yeah.
And so part of me, I really want to write it off as an artistic choice. And I agree with you. It conveyed a sense of chaos, didn't it?
Yeah.
I think you're right there. I think you've hit the nail on the head with that one.
Yeah. I think with that, when it comes to artistic choices with panel layout, that can be a gamble.
Yeah.
Because if you don't get across the meaning, then it can just be just difficult to read.
It's a big swing and a miss, isn't it?
Exactly. And I think to give the biggest benefit of the doubt, it's they attempted something and it just didn't scan as well.
Yeah, but I'm
just saying that's a possibility. Like the other one is, it just could be the layout just didn't work at points.
Did you find that it made it difficult for you to understand the meaning? Because if there were times where it did, but it just made me kind of go back and scan through it. I found myself having to refer back a lot.
I didn't have to necessarily refer back, but I mid page reading would go, oh, I think I've jumped a bit, and then go back and like, you know, but when it's just within one page, I don't mind that as much. And I think that might be a having read comics for longer.
Yeah,
I think
maybe.
you get more of an intuitive like left to right reading and thinking if you've missed a part. But again, it could just be, you know, it could be a mistake or a creative mistake, or it could be a creative gamble. Like it could be one of either.
And I suppose this is something that you and I have been talking about a lot, which is like our own personal growth while we've been making this podcast. And actually, there was a distinct point where we started talking about panel layout a lot more. Maybe if we had read and talked about this on week 1, and this was episode 1, it wouldn't have even been something that we'd considered.
Yeah,
I think we are both becoming better critical reviewers of comic books. Like, genuinely, I think we are. The listeners may have a different opinion. If you do have a different opinion, comicliterate@gmail.com, let us know.
Good plug.
Hey, I got it in there. I wove it in, baby.
Like a real salesman.
Well, don't accuse me of that.
Don't sully your
That's
achievement.
foul.
Like a real corporate synergist, if that's a thing.
Oh, God, I bet it is.
Yes, possibly. One thing that I found kind of interesting, and I don't think this might be like a just me thing, like this might not be anyone else's interpretation at all. It's this and larger media as well. But I found the choice of the characters' jobs was an interesting choice. And I think this is, for me, I noticed it in this, and then when I sat and kind of thought about it in larger media, I noticed that with this kind of group of people, there weren't many like was there any blue-collar jobs at all? Now, one thing I think contextually it makes sense, because if you're in this kind of group of friends and you're this kind of personality, you meet people of similar personalities. So there are a lot of creative type jobs, as well as like general go-getters. Someone works for like DNC and that kind of stuff.
They were a bunch of New York socialites in their 20s.
Exactly. And so contextually, absolutely fine. Like completely makes sense. But I thought it was interesting the choices that a lot of writers, both of comics and TV and film, the jobs are always kind of at most like very interesting artistic jobs, and at least like just white collar jobs. Like that's their version of boring. But you never see. A good example I realized with this was every Adam Sandler film, he's like an architect.
Yeah.
And it has to be that job where it's kind of like, it's a busy job, but it's not a boring job. They're a creative person as well.
Ted Mosby, architect.
Exactly, yeah. Or lawyer or doctor or, you know, whatever. But there's rarely ever, and this is across, again, not just this comic, but all kind of film and TV and fiction, especially in the modern era, there's rarely ever like plumbers or carpenters or electricians.
I mean, they are the romantic foil in a rom-com where somebody goes home to their hometown and meets the kind of naive but grounded plumber.
Yes.
Who they loved in high school. And that's where those blue collar jobs come in, when you want to make someone appear really grounded.
Yep. And one of the examples that actually is the exception and proves the rule that I remembered was for some reason, remembered watching the rom-com with Ali Wong. And I can't remember what it's called, but it's the one that had the cameo from Keanu Reeves, which was fantastic. Like it's
Keanu Reeves, isn't it?
Exactly. And it's a good film. But the guy that character you literally described, I thought of him because he was a delivery driver. Yeah. I was like, I think that's like the one example I could think of immediately of someone who didn't have that kind of job. And you've just explained why that is.
Yeah, it makes them grounded, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to if you are a writer of things like this, you probably run in the circles of people having these kind of jobs. So it makes sense.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, there was this knowing nod to like New York bar culture, and they all seem to be in, you know, like there's a moment where Reggie's in a bar with everyone, and he's an artist. And so they're all kind of drinking in Manhattan, and he's like, right, I've got to go back to Brooklyn. And it's like, oh, so he's the artist, and so he can't afford to live in Manhattan with the rest of them. He's got to go get the fucking J train back to Brooklyn, right? Like, you know, it was very knowing about that world. And so I would imagine that the writer is writing from experience. If you are the writer and you live in like Milwaukee or something, let us know. But I imagine if we did a little bit of a Google, we'd probably find that they were part of that world.
Yeah, and I think it's fair enough for writers to write what you know, either whether consciously or subconsciously. Like, it's just going to happen, I think.
I mean, it rings truer.
Yes. But the only reason I noticed it in this more than anything else I've read or watched is because one of the storytelling devices is that the characters are described in what we assume are Walter's own own notes or files, and they are referred to by their job title. So we assume that has something that will have some deeper meaning later, but they're given a job title and a symbol, and the symbol is used to like, here are your things around the house, and it becomes clues to the larger mystery and everything. But only in seeing the actual occupations that I went, there's a lot of like artistic and white collar jobs. Yeah. And not surprised, but that's when I kind of noticed the larger pattern of larger media.
It's interesting because I hadn't really thought about it.
Mainly, this will be one of the tangents I use in the description of this episode. So I'll be like, Ryan and Jamie also discuss the portrayal of working class jobs in modern fiction or whatever. But yeah, it was just a little bit I noticed. I did notice that a little note, the library that they go to, which they find everything, and seeing the Sandman in there, as well as probably some other titles I didn't immediately notice, but there's probably some other. They specifically mentioned there's comic books in there.
Well, this is a DC
Black Label.
And there was this moment, right, where I thought you'd hoodwinked me. Because I got to the end of an issue and there was an advert. And it was, who's the skeletal bloke, bad guy from DC?
Skeletal?
Yeah, maybe Dr. Doom?
No, not DC. You mean like a skeleton? Or
Yeah. Bad guy, skeleton head.
I mean, there's a couple. Black Mask?
Don't look at me, mate. I'm asking you.
I mean, he's one of them, so it could have been him.
There was an advert.
Yeah.
And it was a list, and it said multiverse things to look out for, and it was a list of superheroes and their traits. And then this guy monitoring a bunch of screens in the multiverse, and I went, oh, for fuck's sake, is this fucking superhero shenanigans disguised as something arty? And then it took me a second to process it, and I was like, no, the art style's changed, and we've gotten to the end of the issue.
Yeah.
This is just an advert.
What's interesting as well, you mentioned earlier about comparatively James Tynion's previous work, Something's Killing the Children. You said that was a bit more comic tropey.
Yeah.
What's interesting is that was actually released by a third party, Boom Studios.
Yeah.
Whereas this being DC Black Label, so DC, but they're kind of the way they do like the more artsy stuff. Yeah. So it's kind of interesting that this is the least comic tropey one, but it's by one of the big two.
Yeah, absolutely. It is wild, isn't it?
When you said it before about the panel layout, one thing I did notice was I made a note about the panel layout, but not specifically layout, but the panel specifically. Yeah. And there was a couple of times where, those big spreads made up of smaller panels. Yeah. I noticed the art was quite distinct in each panel. Yeah. Not quite, it was still the same style, but there were little bits in each panel which were different to others. Like there'd be, say, more or less light in them, or more or less more detail in one and less in the other, and things like that. And I think, again, layout, we've been over that. But at least when they were doing lots of panels, there was still like care and detail to each individual panel, even when they were like 1/10 of the page as well. So there was a lot of attention to detail.
Oh, I mean, well, this is the thing. It's really interesting because we talked about the distinct lack of detail in the art style, but there was a really great attention to detail, wasn't there?
Yeah, and even as ironically, some parts having less detail was a actual knowing choice.
Yeah, it was one of the finer details.
Yep. And detail being a fastidious trait. Fastidious. Fucked up. But basically, the thing I said earlier relates to this now.
Absolutely, yeah. No, it's come full circle.
Yeah, and I think this is a good place to call it, unless you've got anything else at all.
No, I think this is a logical place to call it. I would highly recommend this comic book.
100%.
I would highly recommend that you, humble listener, come back and listen to us finish talking about it. That's going to happen at some point in the next couple of weeks, I would say.
Yes, I definitely am going to finish it, because I'm going to finish it because the best recommendation is that I want to finish it.
Yeah, it's that good.
Yeah. I don't have to just stop reading it because we've done the episode now, like some other titles, but I will actually finish it because I want to know what happens, and we'll go over that at a later date.
So we love hearing from you. If you would like to reach out to us, you can do it at comicliterate@gmail.com, as I mentioned earlier. If you'd like to leave a review, just stick a review on wherever you get your podcasts from. Thank you so much for listening, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Goodbye.